Most people think that long-term fasting means that you're going to naturally lose lean muscle tissue. But what if I told you that I did a 5-day fast and I actually gained lean muscle tissue and I lost body fat as a result? I can't wait to show you how. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Energetically Efficient Show. I'm Kristin Rowell, and today we are going to talk about long-term fasting and its effects on lean muscle mass. I'm very excited to report to you about this topic because I personally have done 2 different 5-day fasts. And before you're like, wait a second, I'm tuning out, I don't even want to listen to this episode, I want to encourage you to listen to it because there's so much valuable information in here for you, even if you never decide to do a 5-day fast. I want to start by saying, why in the world would someone fast for 5 days? Well, here's why I decided to do it. So I was really interested in fasting starting probably about in 2015 or so. Now keep in mind, if you don't know my story, I had fallen on ice in Williston, North Dakota in December of 2013, and I broke my right leg, you guys, in 10 places. 10 places. Wild. So, and this was my right tibia fibula. So it was on the bottom part of my right leg below my knee. After that incident, after that injury, I really started to become very interested in real food nutrition. And the reason for that was I was floored that I fell on ice and broke my leg this badly. I said, wait a second. At that point in my life, I had already run many marathons, perhaps even 20 marathons at that point. And I had been strength training the large part of my entire adult life. I actually started strength training when I was 14 years old. So I thought, I know I have strong bones. I know I do a lot of weight bearing activity. How in the world could I have broken my leg this badly? And so it really got me to start to learn about nutrition and how I could feed my body best to support my bone health, my muscle health, my brain health, and everything else. Through my journey, I started playing with intermittent fasting. Many of you know that intermittent fasting has been all the rage for at least the last 10 years, and it has to do with the fact that a Japanese researcher won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of a process or mechanism in the body called autophagy. Autophagy is a Latin term. It means self-eating, and it's spelled A-U-T-O-P-H-A-G-Y. It literally translates to self-eating. I think of autophagy as very much, and this is going to date me, and it's okay, I use this analogy all the time, but it's very much like the old school game of Pac-Man. So for any of you who are in my vintage who played Pac-Man when you were little, Pac-Man literally is just like autophagy is, where your young, healthy, vibrant survival of the fittest cells, your most energetic, vibrant, healthy cells literally eat up your dead, decrepit, diseased, some cancer-ridden, some other diseased cells to keep your metabolism and your mitochondria running efficiently as possible. So fasting has benefits of autophagy, and the longer you fast, the research shows that the more benefits we get in this regard. So I played around with intermittent fasting for a long time, and then I got curious and said, well, what if I fast for longer? And then I did my first 36-hour fast, which is simply you don't eat after dinner on, let's pretend it's a Sunday night. I just like to use Sunday as an example. You don't eat at all on Monday, and then you eat and break your fast on Tuesday morning for breakfast. So it's really only 1 day without food and 2 sleeps. I always like talking about sleeps because my sisters and I still do the how many sleeps until Christmas every single year. So after I successfully navigated a 36-hour fast and I got really good at that, I was like, well, let's see if I can go 48 hours. Let's say if I can go 72 hours. And I got really good at doing a 72-hour fast and was doing those pretty regularly every quarter for a long time. And the reason that I chose to do a 72-hour fast pretty much every quarter is because I knew the autophagy benefits it was giving me. And I also knew because I was getting this autophagy benefit, I was really helping my metabolic health. One of the primary reasons that you would engage in this sort of longer fasting when you are cleaning up those disease cells is to avoid things like autoimmune diseases, to avoid things like cancer, to avoid things like any other sort of calamity you could think of that you could develop in the body will be your chances of getting any such disease would be lessened if you engage in regular fasting practices just to get out those diseased and decrepit cells. So I remember talking to someone, this was a few years ago now, and I was talking about the fact that I've done a lot of these 3-day fasts, and they said, well, the real magic in long-term fasting happens on days 4 and 5. And I thought, shoot, you're probably right. In fact, I think when I was having this conversation, it was with someone when I was on a retreat or a trip, actually visiting a friend in Costa Rica. And this was in 2022. And it got me thinking about whether I really wanted to start to do a 5-day fast. So I did my first 5-day fast, February of 2023. I don't remember if that actually was my first 5-day fast or my second 5-day fast, but I've done 2 of them. I definitely will do more in the future. I need to put another one on the calendar because it's one of those things that you really have to commit to and you have to sort of build your calendar around. But I want to tell you about the experience of my 5-day fast and then encourage you to just take away whatever it is that resonates with you here and whatever you want to learn from it. So when I heard that the magic really happens in days 4 or 5 of the fast, I told the person, because they had done lots of 5-day fasts, 10-day fasts, etc. I said, tell me what you mean by that. And they said, well, it wasn't until days 4 and 5 that I felt that I got into deep ketosis. I really was in a ketogenic state that was much deeper than my body was able to achieve in those first 3 days. And of course, for anyone who's experienced any measure of ketosis, you know that once you get into ketosis, you have a supercharged brain. You have supercharged energy. You have supercharged strength. It's actually quite bizarre how good you feel when you get into that level of ketosis because it's not something we're taught at any level of education. All of us, anyone listening or watching this podcast right now, was born into a generation where we are marketed to, advertised, and sold every single variation of food and drink product on the planet 24/7. So we aren't taught, many of us weren't taught or raised with mentors who fasted. I certainly didn't have any mentors of mine in my life who fasted. My parents didn't fast. My grandparents didn't fast. None of my coaches fasted. None of my professors fasted. None of my teachers fasted. None of my religious leaders fasted. There was no one in my life that led by example in that regard because it really wasn't a thing up until the last 10 to 15 years. So I say all of that because it's really a commitment when you consider doing something like this for 5 days, but I was curious enough about the benefits and specifically getting into that deep ketosis to see what I would feel like. Also, I wanted to see if I could do it without losing any muscle tissue. And I thought that this was sort of a really big challenge that I was taking on when I first decided to do this. But I also thought I really want to conduct an experiment and see if that's real because I had read a lot about longer term fasting and I figured there was a way you could do it healthfully. And I already knew that being in a state of ketosis, so getting into that ketogenic state, and the fastest way to get into ketosis, you guys, is to just stop eating for several days. You'll get into ketosis like that because your body will run out of stored glucose and then it'll have to start producing ketones for your brain. And ketones for your brain are so healing. So I decided to do this 5-day fast. It is true that days 4 and 5 were pretty magical. And I just want to share what I went through with you. Okay. So when I decided to do this experiment, I was hearing a lot about things like this, that you can't build muscle and fast, that fasting breaks down lean muscle tissue, that you have to have carbohydrates to gain muscle tissue, that you need protein to gain lean muscle tissue, that fasting is catabolic. I also heard that studies show that caloric restriction is equally as effective as intermittent fasting. So there's no need to fast. You can just focus on calories. I also read that long-term fasting is inconsistent with anabolism, anabolic, building, getting bigger. So it's not an effective strategy for gaining or retaining lean tissue. And although I would say that many of those things, there is some truth to them. Certainly there's science to support some of these things. There's also the converse argument in a variety of these points about things used strategically, like a 5-day fast to really get into a deep ketogenic state. If you do it well, where you strength train during those 5 days, you actually can do it without losing lean muscle tissue. That's what I was able to prove. And when I tell you guys about my results in a little bit, you're going to be blown away. So what I think has been missing from the fasting discussion for so long is, what is the difference between glucose and ketones? Why do we have those two different substrates, and how are both of those two substrates affected during fasting? And I always say that in a lot of these other studies, sort of in what I just talked about in the last few points, I figured that those study participants are likely not fat adapted, or at least there's no discussion in the literature about whether those study participants are metabolically flexible. I think it's very likely that most people who engage in these studies are not metabolically flexible, which could skew the results. And when I say metabolic flexibility, I simply mean your body's ability to go back and forth very easily between fuel sources without you feeling miserable because of it. So if you're someone who gets hangry, or if you're someone who can't go more than 3 or 4 hours without food, without feeling the effects of it, without feeling lightheaded, without feeling hangry, without feeling irritable, without feeling shaky, I hate to break it to you, but you're not metabolically flexible. It tells me that your body is really searching for those carbohydrates in order to keep going because it doesn't know, it hasn't been reminded that it can simply go into your fat stores for fuel. I also feel like what's missing from the discussion about longer-term fasting is the fact that ketones are muscle sparing. We know when we're in a ketogenic state, our body actually preserves its lean muscle tissue. It spares going into the muscle tissue for fuel. In other words, it doesn't eat the lean muscle tissue for fuel when you're in ketosis because ketosis is this alternative fuel source. Biologically, think about it. We're wired to save muscle. What would make you survival of the fittest? What would make you outlast the other tribal warriors out there who you're competing with for food back in caveman times? It would be your ability to have muscle, to be able to sprint away from a dangerous situation, to be able to outperform your competitor. Also, when we break down body fat, our body utilizes the glycerol molecule as glucose. So any glucose needed would accelerate fat loss. And I'm talking about now in a fasted state here. And then the other thing that I think is neat is because we're in a modern society where you have these amazing supplements in some regard, essential amino acid supplementation supports fasting and it can be used to retain lean muscle tissue while fasting. Essential amino acids have virtually 0 calories and you could take them during a fast to preserve lean muscle tissue, and that's what I did. So what I concluded in conducting an experiment on my body and the body of one of my friends, so I was the female in the experiment, my friend was the male in the experiment. He agreed to do this 5-day fast with me so we could test and see what would happen. I've done a whole podcast episode on U, R, and N of 1 experiment, so I encourage you to listen to that if you want to learn more about your own body. But what we concluded in our experiment that we conducted is that you can lose body fat and gain lean muscle tissue at the same time in a fasted state. And I frankly was blown away with that conclusion and very, very excited about it. So I want to tell you about what I was from a 10,000 foot view doing with my 5-day fast protocol. So the goal of my experiment was to fast for 5 days and not lose 1 ounce of lean tissue. I didn't want to cut into my muscle tissue. So in order to create an experiment, I did a DEXA scan on the first day of the experiment, and I had my friend do one as well. So we both did our DEXA scan, and then we did a DEXA scan on day 5 of the experiment. I set up this whole experiment for us where we strength train on days 2 and 5, and that we would consume a certain amount of amino acids intra-workout on those days to make sure that we were preserving lean muscle tissue. I had rules around that we couldn't engage in any high-intensity interval training on certain days, or if we wanted to, it had to be on certain days of the experiment, but that we were mostly walking at a moderate pace for exercising. We were not running at all. I created protocols for us around how many amino acids that we would take during the course of the experiment, what sort of other things we would use. And I will tell you, in terms of those quote unquote other things that we would use, we also were aided in this fasting period by using apple cider vinegar. I would use molecular hydrogen for both of us. I gave the assignment to my friend, and I also took this assignment for myself, was to engage in cold showers during the portion of this experiment to accelerate fat burning. I had him, and I of course also took a certain amount of resveratrol each day to stimulate the AMPK pathway. I did a ton of research about this in terms of putting this protocol together. And in order to accelerate our cellular healing, in the protocol, I also prescribed for us that we would engage in a certain amount of hyperbaric oxygen therapy to just help with that cellular senescence and to get rid of those old damaged, decrepit cells and really enhance the strong, amazing cells. So those were some of the key components of the protocol. We obviously had to drink copious amounts of water. I made sure we had electrolytes each day. I also created a protocol around checking our ketones and blood glucose upon waking, midday and afternoon and before bed, because I was making sure that we were trends spotting in terms of where we were at with glucose and ketones, and then making sure we were always in ketosis. Because again, you want to make sure that you're in a ketosis state to spare lean muscle tissue, which is huge. We did use exogenous ketones as needed on certain days because, again, I wanted to make sure we did not get out of a ketogenic state so that we could spare our lean muscle tissue. Then, as needed, I would also allow us to have a certain amount of MCT oil. We would, to the extent our central nervous system was overstimulated from the intensity of the fast, we would engage in some breath work. We had to make sure we had a certain amount of sleep each night. I've had a protocol for us in terms of once we broke the fast on day 5, what we would do in terms of digestive enzymes, and then exactly what we'd eat. So all of those were components of the fast, and I should just preview here, and I'll say this again at the end of this episode. If you want the details, the actual details of this fast, literally I have it all written out step by step. It's a 5-page document in terms of the protocol I created. You can simply click the link below this video and I will be happy to send you the protocol in case you want to try something like this for yourself. So just again, click the link below this video. You will get your 5-day fasting guide, and I'm excited to see if this is of interest to you. Okay, so I want to talk about the results because the results are so freaking impressive. I was just so excited about this. So for both of us, we were in nutritional ketosis within 16 hours of fasting. So this was by day 1, and that was without exogenous ketones or MCT oil. So we both got into ketosis. Now keep in mind, this individual, my friend, and I were already metabolically flexible and we would both consider ourselves low carb athletes. So he's a low carb athlete, so am I, but we were able to get in ketosis easily. Our blood sugar stayed low and steady throughout the experiment, with the lowest reaching 50 milligrams per deciliter before breaking our fast. So that's pretty low blood sugar. Our ketones increased to a maximum of 5.4 millimole before breaking the fast. So that was the highest ketosis I had ever seen, and I felt incredible with that level of ketones in my blood. I felt incredible on days 4 and 5. We both did, with the exception of the morning of day 4. So both of us had a little bit of crunchiness on the morning of day 4. And then we had molecular hydrogen and the exogenous ketones just to help support our ketosis. And we both felt 1,000,000 times better. The thing that I was the most surprised by, you guys, is on day 5, keep in mind, that's one of the 2 days that we strength trained. I walked in. Okay, so let me back up. 5 days of fasting is 120 hours. Okay, so I was going to break my fast at 120 hours. I walked into the gym at Discover Strength, 110 hours fasted. Now, I was thinking in the days leading up to that, how am I going to get through that workout? This is going to be insane. I walked into Discover Strength in Northeast Minneapolis. I'll never forget that workout. And I was training with the CEO of Discover Strength, Luke Carlson, who's a good friend of mine. And I said to Luke, I feel so strong right now, I could push this gym across the street. And he was kind of laughing at me like, okay, let's try it. I had one of the best workouts of my life, you guys. It makes no sense. I had not eaten any food for 5 days. Okay, I was on day 5. I was 110 hours into this fast. I was breaking my fast 10 hours later. One of the best workouts of my entire life. And it proves that ketones are an alternative source of fuel and that you can really be fueled by ketones and feel so good. I felt amazing during that workout. So I had extreme strength. That strength training workout was unreal. Luke was very impressed by the amount of weight that I was able to utilize in that workout because I didn't not have it in terms of any of the exercises. So in terms of my results, I lost 2.6% body fat and gained 2 pounds of lean muscle tissue. This is DEXA scan to DEXA scan, day 1 to day 5. My visceral fat went from 0.5 pounds. So I already had very healthy visceral fat. And just as a reminder, you guys, visceral fat is the fat around your organs. Okay, that's the most dangerous fat you can have. We do not want to have a lot of that fat. It went down to 0.1 pounds. And my T-score, which is my bone density, went up by 0.1, which is amazing. And then my friend, he lost 1.4% body fat and he gained 1 pound of lean muscle tissue. His visceral fat went from 0.7 pounds down to 0.3 3 pounds and he maintained his T-score. So he didn't lose an ounce of bone density. And I have both of our results here, which I will put on the screen for you guys. So my results I'll put on first. You can see that the first date of the DEXA scan was on February 2nd of 2023. The second date of the DEXA scan was on February 6th of 2023. And you can see all of those results there. So you can see them in plain daylight. And then he has the same, and I'll put his up second. So his first results, February 2nd of 2023. Second results are February 6th of 2023. And I was just blown away by this. It was such a fun experiment for us to do. Now, granted, I can't recommend enough, if you're going to do something like this, doing it with a partner, doing it with someone else. There's obviously, I'm sure, a ton of people where something like a 5-day fast would be contraindicated for. So if you already have pretty low body weight, if you have any sort of food disorders, eating disorders, any sort of distortions around food, if you have never fasted or if you haven't engaged in any long-term fasts, I certainly would not recommend this. If you aren't metabolically flexible, I certainly would not recommend this. Keep in mind, you guys, I worked up to this over the course of several years. I did a lot of intermittent fasting, a lot of 36-hour fasts, and a lot of 72-hour fasts and everything in between before I ever ventured into 5-day fast land. I did use as a guide in order to put together this protocol. I took a lot of nuggets out of the book, and I'll put the image of the book up here. I'll also link it below this video, Tools of Titans. And that's the book by Tim Ferriss, where he has a different chapter devoted to his interviews and his interviews and discussions with, all sorts of different titans of their industry. And this particular chapter was Tim Ferriss and his experience with Dom D'Agostino, who's one of the fathers and godfathers, really, of the ketogenic diet and of ketosis. And so there were different things that Tim learned between his first 5-day fast and his second 5-day fast, or maybe his was a 10-day fast, between the first time he did it and the second time he did it, where he learned like what not to do, so to speak. And so I implemented a lot of the things he learned before his second long fast and included those in my protocol. If you really want to understand what not to do in terms of a longer fast, I recommend that you read that chapter of Tools of Titans, because it's extremely illuminating in terms of what Tim experienced when he did not properly set himself up for going several days without food. There truly, you guys, is a method into doing this. And so I do not recommend that anyone just willy-nilly decide to not eat for 5 days without the right kind of support. You need to have electrolyte support. You need to have supplement support. I think you need to have exogenous ketone support. I certainly think you want to monitor your blood sugar and your ketones by using a glucometer or a ketone meter. And I also think it's really important to have a guide, an experienced guide, to lead you through something like this. So I'm happy to share this protocol with you. Please, if you want to see what our protocol was, you can, again, click the link below this video, and I will make sure to send that to you. But this comes with every sort of disclaimer I could give you, which is this is not medical advice, okay? And I am a nutritional therapist, but anyone listening to this podcast, unless you actually are my client and have signed an agreement with me, you aren't my client, so I can't give you advice as to your particular scenario. That said, if you are ever interested in one-on-one coaching, I do offer a few spots each year, depending on my client roster. I do have usually a wait list going in terms of people to work with me, but you can also click on the link below this video to learn more about my one-on-one coaching. And if you're interested or want that kind of in-depth support, you can apply to work with me through that link. I hope you found this podcast information helpful. I hope that you really are inspired about fasting, even if you never decide to do a 5-day fast. I hope there were things in here that inspired you to say, I still could fast. I could do it without losing lean muscle tissue. I can strength train. I can figure out ways to get myself into ketosis. And all those things are just going to support my metabolic health long-term. Thank you for being here. It was great to have you, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.